There we go. So it's 10 o'clock. We'll give it another minute before we start because we've postponed from Friday due to my problems with the internet. Maybe people can't join, so we'll just play by ear and take it from there. Anybody want to bring something up? Well, Melody, I did reply to your outline about, and we'll be talking more about this today. Specifically, it's about the how. How do you do this? So a number of you have already shared what you want to do. Some of you have mentioned why, but it seems to be not quite a challenge to get into the leadership process, into the design. This is how I will do it. This is who I'm going to speak to first. This is how I'm going to make sure it works. And this is how I'm going to make sure we don't have unintended consequences. So this is, we sort of touched on that briefly before, but this is what we're going to focus on from now till the end of the course, to really try and dig into the how, because obviously I don't choose what you do or why you do it. That's entirely your choice. And it's fundamental that whatever you do is connected to your own purpose. But the how is where it gets tricky. As we all have, you're talking about public speaking, correct? And regenerative leadership does have a component of public speaking. And one of the findings in my research was that people who really get the sustainability virus or bug, they become fearless. So what my encouragement to you and everybody, hey, Diana, can you, there you are, mute, yeah. So my suggestion to you and everybody is to go back to your purpose. What is it that makes you fearless in going out and sharing what you realize is more important or bigger than you, that you must do this, despite your misgivings about yourself? And I have that same issue as well about how do I go out and share this thing until it becomes more powerful than your fears. It's daunting. And it can be challenging. So one of the suggestions is also, and I put that in my response to your project, is always start small. Start with 1 or 2 people who are like-minded, who share your values, your ideas, and figure out your model. If you get your model worked out at that small pilot level, then when you grow it out, you expand it, you will have learned how to engage even those people who might be more hostile or less willing to explore some of the crazy ideas you're bringing out. And how do you actually share those ideas or convey them in such a way that they're no longer quite so crazy, they have a logic to them that can inspire other people where they are, which we've talked about as well, this idea of the tree hugger in the boardroom speaking to the CEO. If you know what moves those other people who are more resistant, you will have that spiel, you will have that pitch that will engage them, that will say, oh, okay, there's something in it for me here, which will get them more willing to take that first step out of their comfort zone. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right. So morning, Kerry. Morning, Jimmy. Wow, Jimmy is joining us from somewhere over there on the other side of the world. So hi, Jimmy.
Hi, good morning. Show my face quickly. It's 1 AM here, so all good.
Oh. So where are you now? Because you were somewhere else.
I was in Bangkok until yesterday, so I just arrived. So I'm in Solomon Island again. That's why I said it's 1 AM today.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Wonderful. So welcome everybody. We've already started a bit of a conversation, but I wanted to really begin with what your questions are, what you have done. Have you been able to do some work on week 3? Unfortunately, we postponed till this morning to cover week 3, and we will be having the live session on Friday for this following week. So that will give you more time to be able to work on your project. But now is the time when we get into the how. Most of you have already shared what you want to do, but most of you have not actually begun doing very much on the how, using the regenerative leadership framework and the other frameworks and tools that are the sort of the content of this week, and hopefully some of you have been able to take a look at some of that and have questions or thoughts or suggestions. So going back to that initial question from last week, what have you learned since the last time we met? So let's open it up to what you have actually picked up from the last week. Nothing new? I mean, you've actually shared some wonderful posts. You've actually written to each other, you've responded. Surely there's something you'd like to share or questions that you might have. Carrie, is that you?
Yeah, John, I think for me, I'm almost a week behind in a way. I've gone and looked at week 3, but I've also gone back to week 2 again. Okay. And I'm just going through some of the reading, particularly some of the reading set by yourself in terms of your regenerative framework. And I think one of the areas that I was struggling a little bit with in terms of the framework was the kind of infinity, so the indirect path to regeneration. And I wondered if you could maybe just kind of expand on what that really is. I think all of the other aspects fit quite neatly for me, but that's just one. And I've sort of got myself initially thinking it was around iteration, sort of building up to increasing consciousness and therefore increasing kind of regenerative practice. But I just wanted to get your clarity on that. Sure.
Let's you've actually given a practical example of exactly that. If you're going back to week 2, this notion of the iterative process of we're never fully there. Let's be humble enough to say we have not really arrived ever in becoming the perfect human being and the perfect leader. We're always a work in progress. And so what comes back from my research is that none of the people that I worked with, I did research with, actually said, yep, I've got it all figured out. All of them actually had become very much more humble with the fact that they realized that every time they thought they'd got to some sort of new understanding and new effectiveness and new success, that it's like getting to the top of the hill and then realizing there's another whole mountain range on the horizon. So it's never really done. And so this whole notion of the infinity is just a reminder that we are never really there. And this is also a reminder to our egos that we may be thinking that we are more or less back from having learned everything and now we can share all our wisdom. But in fact, this is a long way away from the truth. And to accept that and to acknowledge that is one way to be willing to actually ask stupid questions in this forum and say, okay, look, I really didn't understand this and I may look silly, but I don't know what this is all about. Can you tell me more? And there are no silly questions or no crazy questions. And sometimes we are inhibited about bringing these things up because we are afraid of ridicule and embarrassment. And this whole notion of vulnerability that Brené Brown talks about how strength and power comes from vulnerability is a huge insight, was for me, about we cannot control everything. On the contrary, we're very much out of control as a species and as individuals. But the premise is that if we do believe in systems thinking requires us to come together with each other as a system in order to figure this out, because there's no one individual who can make it all work. And that's where we get stuck in the Elon Musks of this world, who have this sort of top-down understanding of how things should be, and it's my way or the highway. And we all see what the unintended consequences of that approach is, of that model. And sharing power is not easy. So whatever Melody wants to do up there in Canada or anybody else, unless you invite people in, even if you are scared of them, they are part of that system. And they will actually be part of the solution, or they're going to continue being part of the problem. And so until you get the entire system working together, you're not going to have a regenerative solution. You're going to have a partial, fragmented solution. And that's scary because the scope of this work is huge. And that's why it's so important to start small. With your project, just focus on one or two like-minded people that you can talk to create something. And that something should not be fixed in stone. It should be enough for you to be able to actually tell your client or your student or the community you want to serve, hey, look, we've got this idea, but we don't know what on earth is really going to work. We need you, the client or the stakeholder, to tell us, before we tell you what we're going to do for you, why don't you join us? We design the process from the beginning together as partners. And this notion of partnership is critically important. Building that relationship is essential if the project is going to have legs. Otherwise, it's always going to be that linear model of operation that is going to make decisions at the beginning and then try to implement them, and then coming up against the unintended consequences of not satisfying your stakeholders' needs, aspirations, or wants, or whatever it is that they believe, and certainly not rooted in their skills, their talents, their values, and their belief systems. So think about that. How do you engage people and create a team that is going to be humble enough to go out and actually ask other people their opinion and ask them to participate, whether you are a municipal government or whether you are a nonprofit or a for-profit. It doesn't matter. The regenerative approach will work as long as you are regenerative in yourself. And that's where we go back to the how. What is your leadership process? Who are you? And it can't be, there's not one size fits all. It has to be adjusted and adapted to your style, to your personality, and the personality of the people with you. And that requires conversations. Otherwise, things to get fossilized or crystallized into, okay, we're going to do it this way because I don't want to engage in public speaking, for example. I'm going to do everything by email. And that is unfortunate, because sometimes we do have to take that risk and take that leap of faith that if we have a great idea, it will move other people to want to be a part of it.
And just a follow-up question then from my side. Sure. I've been reflecting on this a little bit because it's a road that I've gone down already, is, are social enterprises by their nature therefore regenerative? Because essentially in a social enterprise, you're effectively looking at the minimum, you're looking for a partnership, but usually you're looking for a social impact or outcome whilst generating a business or a revenue. So it's kind of already got the blueprint, if you like, towards, it doesn't necessarily make it automatically regenerative in the way that it goes about, but I think it's one of those few organizations that's sort of already set up with that sort of purpose in mind. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
That's a great question. As you see, this is week 3 here on screen. And this wonderful video by Dan Pallotta about the way we think about charity is all wrong is a great lesson for those people in nonprofits who continue to think in the old, what he calls the puritanical way of, money is bad, therefore we don't make money as a nonprofit, and we spend 80 or 90% of our time rather than on mission in trying to get the funds or membership to be able to do.
The biggest issue, it's such a massive issue, and you spend so much time and energy trying to apply for grants. And what we found, which kind of underlined why we moved to social enterprise, was if you've got no track record, you literally do not qualify for pretty much any of the grant funding that's out there. So it becomes this ridiculous cycle. So we did shift towards a social enterprise. And I think that was a good shift. I don't think it's been easy, but I think it's definitely, and I haven't yet read Dan's piece, but that completely talks to what my experience has been.
Right. So a couple of things here. Where are you geographically?
Geographically, I'm based in the UK, but I split my time between here and South Africa. And the social enterprise that I'm involved in is also based in the UK, but working in Kenya. So I've got as
Okay.
you can tell, a very strong affinity to Africa.
No, that's fine.
My soul.
I'm just saying that in the United States, there's a figure, which I don't know if we have the LLC, which is the limited liability company, but now there's the low profitability limited whatever. And that L3C, that is a company that has a social mission, which is very strong, which allows you to actually apply for funding, sponsorships, partnerships, but it is a company rather than a nonprofit. But it has a social mission to improve the quality of life in some way. So whether it's a factory or an education program or a company that generates some sort of product, it does have that legal figure, which is different to an LLC. So maybe in the UK, you have PLCs and whatnot, you might check to see if there is a figure there that allows you to incorporate under that legal figure.
There definitely is. And we actually did quite a lot. We got one of our volunteer legal resources also to do a bit of a piece on it, because there's also different types of social enterprise structures. There isn't just a one size fits all, but I think under the Companies Act, you register as a companies with guarantees or with limits. That gets you under that social enterprise banner, but it doesn't answer the question of how you set yourself up. It just, as you say, it gives you access to certain funding and so on. So there's definitely options.
The problem, well, not the problem here. The wonderful thing about grants, of course, if they're official, they're federal or whatever, then you can, donors can actually write them off their taxes. With a limited liability company, you can't do that. So loans it's either loans or gifts that they can't write off. So there's that challenge. Here in the United States, charity, of course, and philanthropy is very well funded because you can write it all off to your tax return. So that makes it much more attractive. However, it is one of the figures where you actually show the nobility of your purpose without going into the nonprofit black hole, as you call it, as you say, where everything gets so very, very challenging. So again, going back to Dan Pallotta here on screen, and I encourage you to watch the video, I'm not going to share it here. He talks about having a business mindset in the nonprofit sector, of getting away from that notion that the executive director should not be well paid. I mean, how are you going to get a good one if that person is actually volunteering their free time rather than actually being a full-time executive director of the nonprofit with a salary of $150,000 to $200,000 a pound, because they'll be making 2 or 3 times that in the banking or finance sector, and can donate that amount of money out of pocket and write it off their taxes, and make a greater impact than trying to struggle with a nonprofit. So this whole approach here from Pallotta is about shifting the mindset away from that sort of the begging nonprofit asking for handouts to relationship building with important people in the financial business sector in order to partner with them. Again, it goes back to partnering, and you can't partner with somebody who doesn't believe in your mission. So it's how do you create your message so that the bank actually says, hey, it's not only t-shirts that we want our logo on your t-shirts, we want to be a partner. We're going to give you $100,000 a year, and we want to work with you. And so because we can see that you are doing something that's going to benefit us in our bottom line. We did a project here in Southeast Florida for Guatemalan immigrants, for example, where Bank of America was very keen on giving bank accounts to undocumented immigrants. And we had to work with the Guatemalan consulate to provide IDs with people who had no passports, no American ID, so that with that ID, they could open a bank account. And that was an interesting thing. And so it's where you do and what you do that becomes interesting to the private sector that will generate that interest and that ongoing support. We don't have to keep going back and begging for money or writing grants, which of course have huge reporting and accountability issues where you're going to spend a lot of time justifying every penny. And of course, you can only spend what, 5, 6, 10% of your of the grant on overheads and administrative work, which of course then takes away the quality of people's time because people just don't have the time to be able to dedicate to really creating something huge if it has to be just in the free time. So we need to shift away from that. How do we make it? And that goes back to what I was mentioning a few days ago about the work of Peter Senge of how he's brought businesses or done research in how companies like Coca-Cola and the World Wildlife Fund have come together because they have a common interest. So what's the common interest that you can generate with the private sector that you can have a conversation about? And that could be part of the how. Your research. What is the research that you can do to really find out what makes that business function and operate, and what are they thinking about their own future? I don't know if you saw the report that came out from the UN this morning about the fact that we are in a critical phase now of climate change, which is going to have implications for everybody, including business. So it's time for business to really get on board with the climate solutions and not just continue plundering the earth. It's going to be bad for business. Anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. Any other questions? I'm glad you're all pretty well inspired by Majora. I think you found that she does actually embody some of those principles of regenerative leadership, which sometimes in the abstract is rather difficult to understand. Going back to tone, some of the issues that have been brought up by you have gone back to the sustainability mindset of advocacy and going up against. One of the things that somebody like Buckminster Fuller recommended was, if you can't change the organization you're in and it is doing all these horrible things, don't go up against it and try to change it. Leave and create your own. Something to think about. So if your project is going to be within an organization, it's going to have enough power to be able to do something transformative. Otherwise, go away on towards the right and look at what possibilities and opportunities are open to you, rather than getting stuck in the past about how to change the organization you're in. And this applies to just about everything, every human organization we can think of, whether it's in or education or industry or business or anything. Even the nonprofit sector is obsolete in so many ways. And we need to accelerate how we make change happen, and to do it considering, remember, the three legs of the stool of sustainability. It can't just be a social project. It has also to consider how to help people flourish economically, and how do we preserve our natural resources. And all three are only the three legs of the stool, and the stool itself, the whole stool, is actually well-being. This is a planetary and human and living thing well-being. So all of these three have to be brought together in such a way, in a harmonious way, in a balanced way, in order to produce well-being, however you define well-being, whether it's financial, social, educational, freedom, all of these things that move us away from oppression and lack of freedom and autonomy to become ourselves. And that again is the how. So I'm just going through the slides here. I'm not going to teach anything, but hopefully you've gone through this present. Yes, go ahead, Kerry.
Just a thought. Do you think that in the world that we live in at the moment, we're going more towards regenerative or more away from it? And I'm just conscious of some of the political conversations that happen, and obviously I'm talking perhaps with a little bit of a bias in terms of a Western capitalist societies, but you know, when you look at the minutiae of some of those conversations and where they're going, it does make you wonder whether the cultural change here is so big in order to drive towards that sort of regenerative style, that perhaps in some ways we're going backwards. And maybe that's just your point around the whole infinity symbol, is sometimes you feel like you're going backwards in order to go forwards, but it just feels right now some of the issues and tables that are being debated are at such a crazy level of detail that we're almost further away from being this more holistic, systems-driven society. And I just wondered what your thoughts were. And of course, you know, capitalism at its heart is promoting the individual. And having come from an environment like South Africa, where you perhaps have philosophies like Ubuntu, which is around, you know, we're all in it together, and and you raise a kid with a village, and all those kind of things. So in the Southern African environment, it's felt much more inclusive, despite the history. But when I look at the debates that are happening in the US and the debates that are happening in the UK, and I look at the things that they're debating, it often makes me feel quite overwhelmed with the challenge of moving us forward to some sense of well-being in the future. And I don't know if the other teammates on the call feel this as well. It can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming when you think about how much needs to still shift to get to this, what seems quite obvious to me, systems thinking and, you know, holistic approaches. But I just wanted to get a view from you and some of the other team members in terms of where we see regenerative leadership now, because certainly the resources you refer to in the reading, you know, that's going back some years. So it's not it's a concept that's been evolving and coming into fruition. So yeah, thoughts.
It goes back to the 19th century, but yeah, we won't go back that far. There were no TED Talks in the 19th century. So. Let's open it up to the group. Anybody have any thoughts on this? I think this is a very important part of the conversation because of the how it affects our own emotional distress and our morale. Any thoughts on how we address that? Aranti, go ahead.
I have many tangible thoughts on it, but I do resonate a lot with what Carrie shared. Like, I do feel like people in the change making space, or change makers, and people in the nonprofit space, or people who want to make a difference, I think, I don't know if it's disproportionate amount of burnout or also or compassion fatigue. I think we do suffer with compassion fatigue a lot because most of us, or people who want to make a difference, often tend to be empaths, and that takes away a lot of our energy and emotion, and enough time of doing that can make you feel very little hopeless. And until you find that, you know, go back to what really drives you and why do you care about this cause so much again, and have a powerful experience. Often I think people enter this sector because of one or two like powerful experiences in their early life, career stories that change them, or something that really inspires them to be in the space. And after a while it's easy to lose sight of it. So yeah, I was just wondering the same as well. Thank you, Carrie, for bringing this question up.
So how do you make it manageable?
I like the idea of perhaps powerful experiences. I think you hit the nail on the head there. You know, very often you have an experience and then you go away and you want to do things, but perhaps just taking yourself back into the community, or that space that initially really focused your attention and I suppose, you know, helped create your purpose is probably a good way of refilling the engine. Because I agree, I think, you know, as empaths it's so easy to get drained from all of this, but I like that point, and I've written it down about powerful experiences. I think that's a good start point.
It's like Majora's experience of that abandoned waterfront when she was running with her dog. That anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I was thinking, yeah, regarding the management, prioritizing things probably. Yeah, I was thinking the same as Carrie, because, you know, the purpose, you know, we kind of distract from our own purpose. And yesterday I was reading about something that is probably related to this. It was an outside source. It says that people nowadays have a lot of pressure having achievements and purposes, and all people needs to be the same. You know, you have to follow this. And if you're not, somehow you are becoming a loser in this society. Back days, this idea wasn't implied. The thing is, this idea is rising the rates of suicide attempts in our current world. But before, this wasn't applicable, and the happiness and the thrilling of people was rates were at the highest. So this idea just came up to my mind now. I don't know if this related, but I thought it's totally related.
Okay. Hang on, Narati. Melody had just raised her hand as well. Melody? I think Narati.
Yeah, I mean, I just, over the last week or two that I've been kind of talking to people about what the course I've been taking and stuff, and I just have found that there's so many people that are afraid to speak up, that have great ideas, great suggestions or thoughts, but because of they don't want to be attacked, or they just don't have the energy. And I said that also goes back to the burnout and everything else, that they just don't want to share it. And I've been really trying to reach out to those people that don't have a voice or don't want to have a voice, to try to give them that, without the people that are like the most outspoken, that just kind of force it down them, whether it's opposite or whether it's opposed or whether it's for. It just sets everybody else back that actually might have some creative ideas. Like, I'm looking for something on the Golf Finance that we can hang on, something that makes us unique or different, that can draw people in and kind of get that mindset changed. So that was a big thing I was thinking about this weekend.
Yeah. It's that shared purpose there. What is it that brings everybody together in something that they can get excited about and see that this is a way into the future that we had not thought about before, and that we can only do this together, because you can't, own it and, take a monopoly on that. And it has to be something common. Yeah, go ahead, Arati.
Yes. So the reason why this topic really called out to me, because it's something that's very alive for me, like this whole idea of burnout. I think I'm reaching that at my workplace. And I was at the Global Happiness Summit, and one of the sessions that I found really helpful there was about burnout, and then how systemic it is. So when I think more about it, and their framework that they suggested was, dealing with burnout at the individual level, but it's not just individuals to blame for burnout. The systems that are in place are also causing burnout. Depending on the policies that our companies and organizations have, depending on how we tackle and prioritize goals within the organization, that can lead to burnout. And unless the company is giving us, clear guidelines and North Stars to work towards, you are going to keep inducing systemic burnout for all your employees. And I see that so often, it comes in waves right after one academic season, and then everyone's wiped out. So I am, this is also a topic that I'm planning on taking up for my project, and thinking about that change within my organization. In my organization, we do a good job of have post-pandemic come up with good policies around mental health and taking mental health leave, being open to talking about that and offering paid mental health leave whenever people need it, because we just see that as such a challenge. But I think burnout, something that's a little more preventative rather than just coming up when things are at ground zero and you hit bottom, you hit rock bottom, I think is something that I'm thinking about. I still haven't fully thought how might this play out in the org, how might one advocate for it. I have researched a lot of Gallup data around burnout stats across the world, and maybe that might be a good tool to convince the org for, hey, this is preventing this, or actively talking about this will actually help you with employee retention, will help you with productivity with employees, and so on. So I'm still thinking about what might be the exact strategies there, but I do believe it's a systems thing and not just on individuals. And I think individuals are really pushing through because they're trying their best. And I know there is this mass quiet quitting that's happening at organizations where people just are stopping to work. There's also resignations happening, like mass resignations that are happening across different industries because of post-pandemic effects. So yeah, I'm just very curious about all of these topics, and we'll dig in and do more research to come up with actual strategies. So.
Great points. Cornelia?
Thank you. I relate very much to what Arati is saying, and the stress after post-pandemic has risen to 37% in the world. And recently with my team, I think I've been off like last week and this a little bit because we had like a very big impact in my group. I don't know, at the 2 weeks ago tomorrow. And now it's just, this being here is the perfect moment because it's all about regenerative leadership. I'm the leader of this group, and we are all like very much in, I don't know the word in English, duelo?
Morning.
Morning. So I have different stages in my group, and in an organization that they're not very understanding about mental health or all these. So it's like they all want to know, how we do it better so this doesn't happen again. But there's people there having feelings and trying to engage. So I think this burnout is very important at this moment to attend. It's a very vulnerable moment in my team, and there's lots of pressure we're getting, and just because like the psychologist of the institution is available, not all my people want to go to the psychologist, so they go to me. So, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a coach, but I can a little bit, but then they cannot understand this because they say, psychologist check, and we have to keep going. So this is very interesting because my team, I have bring it up to a thinking of peace culture and mental health and all this. So we all work together as a team to work in these thematics. So I think my project will be, now that I'm just a little bit off of like all these emotions and all these like lot of work, still I have some of that, but still I need to maybe, I think it's a very important moment to I was thinking about building more resilience, for extreme conditions or in the team, and how this will impact the whole institution somehow. But coming from the team, like a bottom-up movement. Thank you.
Great. Giving your people a voice and seeing how you move forward. Things. I'll answer some of these, some interesting topics here that do connect. But Diana, what did you want to share?
Thank you. Interesting because today I decided that my project is going to be something that I do at work. I've been working for organizational happiness for the past 3 years with the organization that I work for, with the help of the UPs. That's the first encounter that we had 3 years ago. And now we're moving towards another phase of organizational happiness that we call the power of belonging. That's the purpose, right? But trying to echo what many of you have said today about how can we get there to that point where people feel safe and happy to come to work, right? It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of commitment from leaders. It takes a lot of commitment from teams. And Cornelia, I see you because 6 years ago in my team, we had a loss, a very difficult loss of one of our colleagues. And we had to go through a process for a long time with the team. But the first thing that we did was to have a morning coach or a grieving coach that helped us out. And actually, we went out of site a whole day to another place with nature, and we did this offsite meeting where we were able to express how we were feeling as a team, because we were a team of 8 people at that point with my boss and this coach. And we were able to draw, we were able to cry, we were able to express many of the things that we were feeling at that moment, because that was a very difficult loss for us. So I don't know if it's something that can help you out, but I went through that experience, and that's awful. Losing a coworker is awful, especially if you are a close team. But with empathy, I guess, I'm really proud of the organization that I work for, because it's always been about patient, surrounding patients, right? Helping, transforming, saving lives with the products that we do. But a couple of years ago, our vice president, he decided that the center of our, let's say, strategy is people. Of course, patients are people, but also the people who work in the company, right? So we always say people are first for our teams as leaders. We always say people are first. Yes, we do have KPIs and KRIs, and we have metrics, and we have goals, and we need to make the market, and we need, right? But we are not going to do anything if we don't look at our people. And that's why we have the Organizational Happiness Project, because and focus on the 3, we base this on Lars School book. And I don't know, maybe, yeah, you know it, and the people who went to the summit also maybe know this. We have 3 dimensions: the compassion, the strengths, and the purpose that makes up the happiness index, right? So we worked a lot on compassion, and compassion means how people is being heard, how people is being recognized, and if they feel that they are taken care of, right? So that was the first focus that we had. Of course, strengths is something that is in companies, is something that people work more with development plans and career paths. It's something that is already settled, right? And the purpose, if you work for a company and you are aligned with the why of the company, for example, in my case, transforming lives, saving lives, I do, maybe from HR, I don't do the devices, but I work in the process of somehow I do transform lives of the people who work with me. Not necessarily the patient, but the people who work with me, right? So it's how you take the purpose and how you take the why of the company and you link that to your own purpose. And that's what we try to spread around the people, and also the compassion, right? We do have a well-being program, and that's something that is a big project for me this year, that is part of the organizational happiness or the culture and engagement pillar, let's say. But I see it at this point when she says that mental health is something that it's really important post-pandemic. Many things trigger post-pandemic: family issues, mental issues, emotional issues, financial issues. So we have a lot of people going through a lot of these things that were covered a couple years ago, and now they're out of the open and they don't know what to do with this. So we're trying to work on having a safe place for people. We're working on psychological safety, maybe. I don't know if you've heard of that concept.
Sure.
And giving them, we cannot, let's say, save anybody from a financial situation. We cannot save anybody from a suicidal attempt, but maybe we have the tools that they know they have tools, they have different programs, they have coaches, and they have different things they can go to. So we make sure that we show them where they are. Who can you talk to if you need help in different aspects, right? And that's, I think, the empathy that we should have as organizations, and that's where we can start. So it could spread out in the other organizations, right? And the other places that we go to. When we speak to our circle of friends, we talk about compassion, we talk about listening. So it was funny, just a little anecdote before I finish. On Saturday, I was on a kids birthday party from my daughter. She was invited, and there was this clown doing the I don't know, just a set for kids to have fun. And when he finished, it was funny that he said, "Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you had enjoyed this time, especially the kids. Happiness is very important for the world right now. And if there is anyone in this room that is not happy and doesn't know who to talk to, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a coach, I'm not a professional in this area, but I'm a person that is willing to hear you. This is my phone number, and let me know if you have anything, and together we can find a solution." And for me, it was so shocking to hear that, shocking in the positive sense, right? Because a lot of people were like, what is this clown, right, talking about? It was like, that's so sweet, right? We need more people saying these things, despite the judgment in the faces of all the people around him, right? They were like out of context. It was like, what's going on? What is he talking about? But that's how it starts. That's how compassion starts, with just simple things like that, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I try to do every day. I work with this project for the past 3 years, and more to come, right? That's what we're working on. But that was just a little 2 cents that I wanted to bring today. Thank you.
Great ideas here, and glad to see it happening. So you've actually got something that's working. And now many thoughts coming, but Jimmy, what would you like to contribute here?
Sure. Just checking. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
No, excellent. I thought a couple of things just following the conversation. I think the first one is the background of powerful experience. I've been in the sector for 25 years now, and then been working in Africa, in Middle East, in Asia, now in the Pacific. So powerful experience is something that that really attached with me, why I'm in the sector beyond just working, you know. So very much through I was not there, but following what happened in Rwanda actually in 1995, you know, something that really stick with you, you know, seeing that situation unfolding at that time. You're not able to do anything, but you're talking to yourself, if I had the chance to be able to help people, then I definitely will do something, or something like that, something along that line. So the next question is the conversation whether the industry, or we are more on a regenerative, or you know, closer to that one, or going further away from that one. I think for me it's a conflicting situation. I think the industry has changed for the last many years. As I said, that been in the industry for 25 years now, and I can see the industry evolve. Like for example, in terms of standard, this is something that really changed, especially after many big events that hits the world, like the tsunami and this. You know, it's more you know, organized. Standard is there in terms of how to measure your work. I think we are becoming more professional. I think 25 years ago or so, people going to this industries very much because of calling, and I think now it's because of professional, you know, appointment. So it's very different. So then, when we're talking about more collective mindset and collective behavior, through the you know, more organized, more standardized in the industry, we are going there. You know, we're becoming more collective in our behavior. We're becoming more collective in our mindset. You know, with the issue of JC, for example, the gender inequality and social inclusion, we're becoming more on that one. However, this is what I said, becoming conflicting. When you see the data, just like what you said, John, the today's information about the climate change, we're not there yet. We're still very far on the issue of addressing climate change, for example. Despite all the effort, despite all the standard, despite all this collective you know, behaviors and mindset that has been put and pushed into the industry. So I don't know whether the how is the issue, but I just see that one, you know, the problem is even you know, is even bigger. So through the project that I'm working now through this course, is basically I'm trying to apply this thinking globally but act locally. You know, that's something that I can control within myself. Something. So at the moment, I'm working with my team in terms of really getting this collective mindset and collective behavior here in Solomon Island, working with my team to address some of the basic, like the, you know, especially like accountability, addressing some of the issue with culture here, some of the issue with some of the basic, like being disciplined, attentiveness, you know, and things like that. So hopefully within that scope, I will be able to inspire others, and at the same time I will also get inspired also by my team, because this should be a two-way process, you know, on learning, especially from this regenerative leadership course that I have now. So yeah, thinking globally but act locally also, and then working along within your sphere of influence and control. So yeah, thanks everyone for many of the good stories here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jimmy. I think you bring up some great points, and I think in a sense you answer some of Kerry's questions about the scope of the problem. And Arati and then Diana has also mentioned things, and Cornelia, that are critically important, and we need to be able to understand these and to frame them in such a way that we can feel empowered. I think this is the great problem with global issues like climate change or violence, is that we feel powerless to make change happen and to do anything about this as individuals. And what Jimmy just said about working on what I can control, where I can do something, is so important, because we cannot, as individuals, make climate change go away. But we can if we multiply our efforts at the local level, again, as Jimmy said, by doing what we know. And that's why I keep insisting, don't forget that we do also need to consider the environmental as well as the economic, or the social and the well-being, when we create our plans. And in order to feel powerful, going back to Arati's comment about organizational happiness, about strength, well, where is strength? Well, strength is connected to purpose, but also to what we can do, not focusing so much on what we can't do, which is the global problem. The can't do is very debilitating and demoralizing, and it causes a lot of stress. And it causes stress because there's nothing we can do about it at that level, because we're not there at that level, but we can do something at the local grassroots level. We could make a huge impact. Imagine if every year 100 of people who come to these courses does something valuable at their local level. Imagine how that actually then extrapolates into a completely different approach as we create these very solid, very robust models that can be then expanded and enhanced, and actually then mainstreamed. Remember, let me just share my screen here. With the framework. This whole what I'm asking you to do here is to prototype something at your level that you can create and really work on and enhance until you bring maybe compassion, strength, and purpose together. And next week we're going to be looking at Frederic Laloux and reinventing organizations, and how we bring the whole person and our whole purpose. So the emotions and the spirituality and the values are just as important in who we are as our ability to think and to reason. How do we invite the whole person to be a part of that purpose? And that has the potential to generate that happiness, that generates that confidence. Maybe Melody, you can work on the happiness factor of your project, rather than the disastrous consequences if we don't do something about this, element, which tends to be debilitating and undermining of people's conviction and interest and enthusiasm. How do we get people enthusiastic about something? And I think everything that you're pointing out here about the new reality of post-pandemic, one of the things I keep mentioning is we talk about the new normal, well, can we get to a better normal from everything that we've learned from the pandemic? I actually did a workshop for 3M in Central America a few months ago about management of change. And some of you are bringing up some of these ideas about change and bringing in the whole person, and Cornelia's work and then Diana's work in their organizations with this notion of how do we support each other in this time where we are grieving our planet, in a sense. We feel that grief and that powerlessness about doing something about it. So we need to, how do we get away from that and generate power and real sense of purpose and power for each and everybody in our organization? Otherwise, things will not go well. And we will be suffering consequences. There is no doubt that we've gone too far for this not to happen, but we can mitigate and we can begin to make change happen. Again, can we reach out to our leaders, our political leaders? Maybe. Are they really convinced and committed? Some of them maybe, but unfortunately what we see can tend to make us cynical and to disbelieve the people that are in power. So these are the sorts of challenges that we as regenerative leaders need to work with. We need to understand that, yeah, we are in a very delicate, sensitive time where we do feel a lot of powerlessness. There are lots of old systems. Kirby brought this up in something she shared about how we perpetuate these colonial systems of abuse and oppression. We can't seem to get out of these systems, the political systems, the social systems, where people are not given the opportunity to be themselves and to truly be powerful people. And this goes back to education, which Kirby is also working on, some of you as well, about how do we create empowered individuals, or how do we help people empower themselves in an educational system that does not have that on its agenda. That is not necessarily the central purpose of education any longer, but there are completely erroneous notions of what success is all about, or what a life of success is all about. And we educate by perpetuating these very obsolete models of thinking and doing in our kids. So how do we subvert that system in such a way that we can actually protect our kids and our teachers in such a way that they can actually get an education done in a classroom that's bombarded by all of these difficult challenges and pressures, where teachers are not valued, except in some countries, and where kids are expected to do what they have to do in order to be successful according to someone else's reasoning, not what they want to do. So all of these things are real challenges about our systems and how we might want to think about going back to the drawing board and creating entirely new approaches and new solutions. And they cannot happen if we don't have the right type of dialogue, which, going back to the framework, was this idea of fostering collective purpose through generative conversation, which again is a very broad concept and is very theoretical on paper. What does it mean? What are the implications for the how you do the work? And I think both Diana, Narati, and Cornelia brought up some great examples of how they do it. And Jimmy as well. I mean, you're all doing things that are approximations. We use the infinity symbol again. We're all going through the infinity symbol here, this emerging consciousness and empowerment. That's that topsoil that we need to actually make thicker and deeper, so that what we get out of that topsoil is actually what we really want and need, and not these old models that we keep perpetuating. But that will require being willing to go back to the drawing board and say, well, we might need to start all over again with absolutely everything. If we're willing to do that, we may find things, those seeds at the local level, that can actually have that impact. Otherwise, we keep repeating the same old ways of thinking. So any further thoughts on the framework? Any questions? There's a great conversation. So keep thinking about how you will do your project. That's the key. And so I think Arati's 3 concepts here, constructs about what was it? Empathy, strength, and purpose resonates perfectly well with the framework. And these are the kinds of ideas that can help you crystallize your approach to a conversation, how you create partners in the people around you, not clients or customers. So you're not selling something, you're building something together. And that is something where we have to be entirely and truly human to be able to do that. And we are emotional beings. We do seek meaning. Kerry put a comment in the chat here about losing the sense of meaning and purpose. And it is very easy for us to lose that and to actually cover all of that meaningless over with other things through consumption or stupid patterns of behavior. And sorry, Diana. Oh, Diana, they brought these up. Yeah, my mistake. Yep. Anyway, so moving forward, let me bring back. So some of the things, I don't know, again, this is week 3 that we're looking at here. Some of the things that I share here, and let me just get this going, about dialogue itself, to see if conceptually this works. So you can all see the framework here, the quadrants. This notion, there are only two ways to talk. One is by talking based on what went before. The other way to talk is about the possibilities of something that we might be able to do in the future. So these are the two types of conversation. Otto Scharmer divides that. And then the only other aspect of the important here conceptually is we either focus on fragmenting reality in our conversation, therefore we have our agenda, and therefore we defend what we believe or what we want, or we can actually consider the whole. Can we have that holistic conversation that actually opens up possibilities? So that's those 4 quadrants of what Sharma calls the 4 fields of conversation. So going forward, see if you recognize where, if we're looking at the past and we are looking at fragmentation, when we meet somebody for the first time and have a first engagement, can you see how this could be how we operate? When we meet people for the first time, we engage, we're polite, we're tactful, we're diplomatic, we try to get a sense of each other. Nobody does anything too, risky at this point. However, as the conversation moves, very soon, if we are based in our thinking of the past and in only what we or my people want out of this conversation, we get into confrontation. Think democracy, think competition, think everything that brings us together in confrontation rather than together in a joint purpose. So these are the things that we are accustomed to, that we see happening when you talk about solving climate change. Well, the developing or emerging countries, of course, have an agenda. Industrialized countries have an agenda. Corporations have an agenda. Everybody has a democracy. All interest groups have an agenda. Now, if we can get beyond fragmentation in the past, we can suddenly begin to think different. Notice empathy, how it comes in. Empathy is the prerequisite for listening to someone else. Does that make sense? So again, what Diana was saying about the framework, their framework, and if I can be empathetic, then I might be able to change my point of view from my agenda or my interest to consider and inquire into something different. Maybe there's a better idea out there that together we can figure out and make something work, which will satisfy both our needs or all of our needs. But even this, what we call reflective dialogue here, according to Sharma, is still not quite enough. In order to make this regeneration possible, we need to get to this. Can you see the difference, the shift, even the shift in the energy of the terms here? Where you talk about presencing and flow, about living in the moment. So one of the Cornelia's work here as a coach, how can you get people to move away from fear into a state of mindfulness, living in the present moment in such a way that this moment is regenerative and perfect, and therefore has the potential for happiness and joy? Because this moment that we are sharing at this time, in this present moment, is unique and will never be repeated. But if we are so thinking about everything else that I have to get back to, that I've taken time out of my morning or my day, and I've got to get back to work, and I got emails and they're piling up, and people are knocking on the door, the phone's ringing, I got emails, I got text messages. If all of that is happening at the same time, it begins to undermine our capacity to be mindful. So one of the keys is being able to be that mindful in the present moment when we have this conversation. Not to judge, just to allow what people feel and think and share to be accepted, appreciated, and valued for whatever it brings to me, without judging, without jumping in with my own downloading, as again Otto Scharmer calls, my own old patterns of thinking, to respond to what somebody is saying with the same old recipe, rather than, oh, this is different. And that's that collapse of the boundaries. There are no boundaries in consciousness. So if we are together as a conscious being, as a group here, which will never be repeated in the same way ever again, and we can improvise together what our minds and our hearts are actually sensing, as well as thinking and feeling, then we might be able to develop that how of the project from that deeper consciousness, from that deeper field, where there are no recipes. There is nothing set in stone. There is nothing, if you do these 5 steps, you will be successful, kind of thing. And all of this is very, very fragmented. And even these frameworks or quadrants, or even the regenerative leadership framework, they are abstractions. They don't work. They're useless in themselves. They're just pointers into some kind of direction. But the direction is inwards. And this is what we often do not do when we are with others. We tend to focus outward rather than inward. And if we can be entire and whole people in ourselves, and not afraid or distracted from our personal purpose, then we can generate a much bigger swell of real power. But we need to be clear about how important that is, in order not to allow someone else to take away our power by bringing out, no, we've tried that before, it didn't work, or whatever it is that somebody might say is going to undermine the purity of the intention at this point. If we can have that intention, hold it together, something will emerge that can then be developed through reason and logic into a plan or a strategy. And what some of you were saying about the metrics. Yes, we'll need the metrics, but in the end, the metrics should be the result of something whole and purposeful, and not we are driven by the metrics and therefore we work in compliance with the metrics. Hopefully that makes sense. So, again, are you familiar with appreciative inquiry and David Cooperrider's work? All right. Yeah, those of you close to Vermont, such as Melody, myself, I don't know if you know David Cooperrider is in Vermont with his institute. So normally we treat organizations here on the left, and this is the traditional conventional model of problem solving. You see that? So this is the fragmented approach to problem solving. We identify the problem, we figure it out, we develop a solution, we address the problem, we solve it, and then unanticipated consequences start popping up and say, oh, we didn't realize, we didn't think about this, we didn't think about that, we didn't think about the other. And we no longer have the luxury of that kind of thought process. And the basic assumption is very interesting here, is that an organization is a problem to be solved. So whether it's education or business, it's always about the problem, not about what are the opportunities open to us? What are the possibilities open to us? We tend to fragment organizations into the problems we solve, and therefore we go into silo mode. So each group or unit works on their own problems, but we don't work on the organization's potential. When we look at appreciative inquiry, we look at strengths. We look at what are we the best at in the world at? What can we do better than anybody else? Where do we get that power, that energy to actually decide what might we become? And then we decide what should it look like? And therefore we recognize that the organization is a mystery, really. And when we look at organizations from what Frederic Laloux calls the reinventing of organizations and Teal organization, which we'll be looking at next week, he talks about organizations as reality trying to express itself through us when we come together. If we have the willingness to listen to what that organization wants to become, then we will be perfect channels of that message, and we will bring into reality, we will help be born something that the earth and society really wants, but from a deeper reality or deeper consciousness. But that requires a willingness to step aside our egos. Go ahead, Kerry.
Thanks, John. Just wanted to share, we've applied this appreciative inquiry approach to, so the program that I'm running at the moment for a big old insurer in Africa is basically around financial literacy. And I think it's probably fairly obvious to everybody why we would be interested in driving better financial literacy in the Southern African context, but also broader in Africa. But sort of two parts to what we're trying to do is we're trying to mainstream much better quality or high quality content to support better conceptual understanding. And then the second part of that is then to focus in on teachers and to drive better capacity within teaching or better teaching of financial concepts. So, you know, we sort of went in with a view that we don't want to add financial literacy as yet another subject in a very overburdened environment. And we launched this during COVID, so even more so. But we want to actually find where financial concepts emerge in the existing curriculum and support them. That's the mainstreaming idea. But when it came to the teachers, it was very easy. We did a bit of a test and learn in 2021 to try and understand this space better, because a lot of teacher training programs have failed. They failed to meet any of the objectives that they've set out to do. And I think part of it is because they have typically been approached through the problem-solving lens. When you start to open up the appreciative inquiry, and it's an interesting design approach because you have to build time in. So when you're constructing a program, you now have to kind of create free space, because you're starting off the whole training program with, well, what are the issues? Get the teachers to talk about what their world looks like, and obviously hearing their own voices and hearing voices like them, rather than us coming from our ivory tower, certainly as a commercial organization. It's far, far more authentic for them to be hearing each other's problems and realizing that they're sharing, the vast majority of those problems. But then moving them on to then what should it, what does the future look like? What would be better? How do we overcome those challenges? That part of it has really taken up, I would say, a good sort of 70 to 80% of the overall design. And the content side of it, which is, here's some really useful resources to better teach financial concepts, is become a very, very small component of that. And in addition to the appreciative inquiry, what we then thought about was, you could awaken teachers to their issues and their collective purpose and then you go away, which is what a lot of the courses do. So how do you come back? So we've had to think about having, rather than trainers, having coaches. So really thinking about mentorship. And we've also had to think about a really distinct learning pathway for these teachers. And they just so happen to be teaching a subject that's very undervalued in the South African context. And so you're also trying to deal with that perception and therefore their relative worth. So by putting in a professional development, which could take some of them up to a sort of, postgraduate degree opportunity, really starts to lift that perception as well. So there's been quite a lot of design considerations, and it also kicked off with this appreciative inquiry. So just sharing my experience, it's been a really good tool to reimagining teacher training as we might think of it.
This is an excellent point. And Diana, I'll give you the microphone in a second. One of the things that I see happening with the projects in this course, that people focus a lot of the time on the do, on the actual project content, and not on the process and the design process. And I think what Kerry's brought up here is critically important. It may be critically important to dedicate 70% of your time at this time to the design process, not at going out and doing stuff. And that design process includes incorporating and including your clients or your stakeholders in that design process, in the conversation, in the design. And that's why I keep insisting, all right, how are you going to do it? So this is a great project. How are you going to do it? And so I think Kerry offers a great example of how. And this longer term project or process where you can't just, okay, now we've got the shared vision and the collective purpose, that's great. And then you go away. What do you do step 2 and step 3 and step 4? So in Kerry's case, part of it is professional development. Another one could be creating a mini organization or a work group or a task force that involves these people over time in continuing to develop the content or whatever it is that you want to get out there, whether it's financial literacy or anything else. So how do you establish the continuity? Meetings are not really, we don't do much work in a meeting. What we do is we figure out things, but then the work has to continue. How do you create that bridge to the work in ways that continue to include people in the design and the implementation, and in figuring out the unanticipated consequences that no one individual can figure out over the long haul? So great example, Kerry, and I think that's a very important sort of support for that. Try to keep insisting. Go back, don't be afraid of spending a lot of time in the design of the project. This is where you will actually create what the Buddhists would call that impeccable approach, or the impeccable process. If you trust the process, the results will come on their own. Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
Thank you. Well, basically you answered my question, but it's because I'm used to work for a place full of engineers that they focus on problem solving, right? So that's the language that I learned to speak with them, because if not, I will lose them, right? How can we move from that? So for example, for my project, I have a committee, and I also have my sponsors. So for my sponsors I think that's where I need to apply the appreciative. I forgot the previous slide. The
appreciative inquiry. Yeah.
Inquiry, yes. But how can you get engineers to move from problem solving to this appreciative inquiry? Do you have any ideas? That's something that troubles me a lot.
Yeah, this is a great point. Kerry, you wanted to answer that?
Yeah, I just wanted to perhaps just give a bit of a perspective. So Diana, I'm about to embark on a new program, and it's actually about building a business change capability with a chemicals agricultural and engineering group. So I'm glad you said that, because it was kind of my sense going in, is that they're going to be this very logical, rational problem solving group. And I think the one way that we, myself and my fellow colleagues that are involved in this, we typically do approach it, and I'd love to hear John's view on it, is we tend to use the tool of surveying and then leadership alignment. And what we found out is that if you go into leadership alignments and you kind of got a bit of a blue sky environment, the very dominant voices in the room or the very dominant ways of doing things emerge almost immediately, and it's quite difficult to pull back from them. So if you use a survey tool where you get the leadership team to answer a very small set of questions, and they're almost leading questions, and then you do the same with their sort of next level down, and you kind of assimilate that information. So you give them almost a bit of a factual basis, because that's what kind of appeals to them. You give them a factual basis to start, but you're allowing their voices in the room, rather than us as consultants saying this and that and the next thing. They actually can see from their own kind of results, if you like, but also from the next level down, which often differ, by the way. That's also part of the tool.
Yeah.
Is you're bringing different voices into a room where they might not physically be able to be present. And so we just found that to be quite effective. And we call our process blueprinting, but I think it's quite similar in a way to the backcasting. So we'll very often take them from, okay, if this is your current world, these are all the things you've emerged, then take you forward, looking at what you want this organization to be, and then working backwards. And it's ironic because we very often get pulled in when there's a problem, and they want us to come and fix a point solution. So, this is the problem, this is what we need you to fix. But when we go in to fix that, we find that, there's no strategy, or there's a very limited strategy, or there's a strategy that everybody can repeat, but they don't truly understand in the same way. So everyone's driving their own buses in different directions. So a lot of, our experience has been trying to get that assimilated view in the room, and then getting them to sort of talk to each other with that information, because it kind of, appeals to their very logical problem solving mindset, that they've got some data to work with. And then you can bring in, some of the other aspects. But that's just been, I don't know if it's useful, Diana, but that's
Yes,
definitely
perfect.
been
Thank you.
what
It's
we've
helpful.
used.
Yeah, you're describing my day today. Yeah, they're always looking for numbers and metrics and what is our goal, and they're very competitive, right? So they are looking always to win or solve something. So yeah, so I think, and I like how you call it the blueprinting. I think that's very important to align all of them in the two levels also. Thank you.
So let me address this, what you've got on screen here, between the linear model of design and problem solving, and how engineers and anybody in the scientific realm tends to operate mentally, which is this linear model, very reductionist, where they focus on a very, very limited project or focus or material. I actually did quite a lot of, I would say, facilitation of a dialogue in our College of Engineering with engineers about how to bring sustainability into their curriculum, and how resistant they were to saying, I can't put anything more into my textbook. And I said, it's not about putting more in, it's about thinking smarter about how you use, for example, cement and concrete. How do you actually replace the toxic things, chemical components that actually make cement stick to itself? How do you replace that? Because the bridges that you're building and the roads that you're building with these materials are actually poisoning your kids and your grandkids in the long run. How do you rethink how you come together and create things so that, and you've actually mentioned this, you hinted at it, rather than this linear model where you do things first and then you bring in the next person, then you bring in the next person, you have the integrated design process, which Carrie hinted at. You bring everybody together to have that bigger conversation. But maybe the starting point is a problem, but if you are a skillful facilitator, you can then make connections to the bigger systems in which we operate to have that bigger conversation, so that the civil engineer can work with the electrical engineer and with the architect and with the scientist. And this is this design process that is now followed by anybody who's in the sustainability business, where you build a building, any building, you bring in the client and the engineer and the landscaper and the supervisors from the state, at the state level. Everybody's at the design, so that when you put in the plumbing, it doesn't go through what then people later say, oh, but the elevator had to go through here. You're gonna have to remove the plumbing because that's where the elevator goes. This kind of thinking, design thinking, no longer works. We can't have those kinds of unanticipated consequences. And you can only do that if you can have somebody at the center of the process that facilitates the conversation with everybody who's involved. But don't do the blueprint with everybody from the get-go. Start with a small core team and then build the dialogue, the conversation out as you begin to figure out how everybody, what the attitude is of everybody who's going to needs to be involved in the process. So that provides us, one way of looking at this. So how do you do an integrated design process? And going back to Carrie's point about taking time over this. This is not a quick meeting. All right, who's going to do what? What are the metrics? These are the goals. Off you go. Come back in 6 months, and suddenly you realize that everybody's gone off in their own directions. How do you keep a coherent framework going throughout the entire process until you get your anticipated results, and that those anticipated results are not contaminated by unintended consequences, whether environmentally, socially, or economically, or people's health and well-being? And that's where you get the backcasting idea, the reverse engineering about thinking 100 or 200 years into the future and planning using the integrated design approach in order to make sure that that's what is going to happen, which is not a problem-solving approach. It is more a collective, appreciative approach. That makes sense? And again, this is very abstract, so it's great that you're sharing some examples because this is what actually helps bring this to life. Without those examples, all of this could be totally conceptual and abstract. But we also need to have the capacity to abstract our reality in order to be able to share a vision or even a visual like this with other people, so they can see the difference between, well, thinking like you're thinking in this sort of linear rational approach. If you look at all the models of what has happened before, the consequences have been these. Now, if we take an integrated design approach, these are the potential for greater prosperity, greater health, much more sustainable products, services, or campaigns, or whatever you're doing. And so here are some examples that I'm not going to get into, but here you have for education, for business, for community, all the different moving parts that need to be incorporated into the conversation. And here's an approach that I've developed using originally the work of Peter Drucker and nonprofit management, but I've added a fourth step here into the design of your project. So here's the question that you're asking for your project. Here's the process question for the project. How do you make, and Carrie again mentioned about, how do you get the teachers capable of making the change? Professional development, training, education, whatever it is that's necessary, and obviously the collective and shared vision and the collective purpose, which then allows you to get into this. Doing the research about where we are now, where do we want to go, how are we going to get there, how do we know that we're getting there, how do we sustain people's morale over time? And a long project is 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. How do you sustain people? And so I'm not going to get into the literature here, but anybody wants to schedule a meeting with me and go into this in any greater depth, I'll be glad to do some work on that. And then, of course, at the end of the process, how do you evaluate and assess the results? And then you start all over again. So this is what we do when we go shopping, you know, just to bake a cake, or if you want to manage a major global corporation, we always go through this process and this cycle. Whether we do it well or not, that's a matter for you to judge, and to create that sense that we do create the cycle in such a way that we are always improving, and that's that infinity loop again, but we're also phasing out unintended consequences. So how'd you do that? And again, some of you already mentioned how to do that. You are here, you have your team. This is the group that needs to be absolutely 100% convinced and on board and sharing in the purpose, even if you've not actually written out all the finer points, because you can't do that until you engage your stakeholders, your community, your clients, your customers. So whether it's Kerry's teachers or Diana's engineers, you need to have an initial starting point for that dialogue where there are key principles that cannot be ignored or violated. You cannot have ego in this conversation. It cannot be just about you or about me. There's certain key principles that if you establish those values, you will have the potential to create a shared purpose. Otherwise, things will go downhill very quickly as people come on board and they react or they resist whatever you're proposing, and anybody with more power will tend to pull everybody in their own interest, in their own direction. So how do you manage that is critically important, and that is part of the process. And here are just a few bullet points about how to do this. So this is in the PowerPoint. So again, I'm not going to go through it all. You can use it, and many of you are doing it already. So it's not that you need to know this, you need to learn this. It's just to make sure that if you respect the process, you trust the process, and you're not too afraid to actually allow your spiritual side to emerge, your coaching or facilitation profile to emerge, rather than your controlling or convincing. We won't get anywhere by trying to persuade people to think differently. We can invite them, and we can give them examples of what we think would be wonderful, and ask them to share the same, and see if that generates the conversation, which will then become a task force and a project. Any questions or any comments? Does this resonate with what you're doing? To go thinking, I put up the systems thinking slide here just to get people thinking about. As beginners, most of us are here. We can see elements in the system. We don't have a clue as to how to make a system work. And this is critically important for the process. So in the most sophisticated, advanced individuals and groups, we have the capacity to actually generate these computer models where we can project into the future all these consequences of, if we follow this train of thought, this plan, these are the consequences long term. There are people who can do that. Many of us, most of us can't do that. So we tend to have to operate from our intuitive sense. It's almost impossible for us to actually manage systems rationally or logically. And so we need to focus or depend on other faculties such as intuition, imagination. And this is where we go back to this indigenous wisdom of what will the consequences be of this decision 7 generations down the road, as with the Iroquois or other First Nations in Canada. The thinking and that wisdom which has been inherited and passed on through generations, understanding that if we don't think like systems thinkers, and it really might not be the best term to call it systems thinkers, it might be better to say systems sensors, that we realize that this decision is going to have unfortunate consequences. And we might not even be able to show or demonstrate or know why or how. And all of this has implications for the design process. And that's the end of that. So any thoughts about your how now before we finish? It's already past the time. It's been a great conversation, by the way, so thank you for sharing. Sometimes we get into breakout rooms. I think today was a wonderful example of what we can still manage a conversation with not too many people in one room. But if you'd like to go into breakout rooms next week, you can certainly do that. Was this okay? Or would you like to go into breakout rooms next week? Diana?
No, I think today it was perfect, but it depends on how we are as a group, right? It's
Yep.
like, what's the mood? Because in other times, in previous sessions, the breakout rooms were great also. So
Anybody else? What do you think?
I
Yeah,
think
Aditi, go ahead.
breakout rooms can kind of get more voices in the room, because I do feel like I didn't hear from Carla and Kibli, but I also feel like this kind of dialogue can also ensure that only those who kind of are comfortable sharing share. So, and breakout rooms almost puts the pressure on people to share. So yeah.
Yes. Cornelia posts that she felt comfortable with sharing. Yeah. Rand, go ahead.
The collective conversation was great, and yeah, it's very recommended for me.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll see if more people arrive. Obviously, next on Friday, then we probably will go to breakout rooms. It depends on the number, and we can always see at the moment. If you look at, are you familiar with open space technology? This, like the idea of blue sky or blue ocean.
not really.
It's a very simple concept. To any meeting or any session, the right people are the ones who come, and the right topics are the ones that will be discussed. So there is no agenda. It's an open agenda, open source agenda. And that's called open space technology, where whoever comes are the right people, and whatever we talk about are the right things. And that gives us all freedom to actually come up with crazy ideas. Say, well, I don't want to talk about the regenerative leadership framework. Let's talk about something else, and that's great too. So let's allow the wisdom of the group to suggest things that they want to talk about, not just. I may be facilitating the course, but I don't own it. I mean, these are all ideas that emerge from research and everybody's experience. Go ahead, Kerry.
At the risk of dominating the conversation, sorry. But I just thought it just struck me as a little bit funny. You're saying about let's have meetings with open agendas. I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, but in the corporate world, there's this big anti-meeting sentiment. And I've always struggled with it because I've wondered, where does that collaboration and thinking happen if every meeting you have can only happen if it's got a very distinct purpose, and therefore everybody that's in the room knows what they're doing? And I do get the need for that because there's a certain amount of efficiency required, but I do think you miss the opportunity that some of these meetings are, certainly the role that I tend to have is a facilitation one. So I want to have voices in the room, and it's often in the corporate world, the big anti. Meetings are a waste of time. That's what I hear a lot.
This is a great point, and I don't know if you are familiar with Juanita Brown and the non-conference movement or the anti-conference movement, where conference is also pretty useless, except for when you get together in the receptions, around the water cooler, which where the real conversations happen and the real networking happens. And so that's the World Cafe technique developed by Juanita Brown with regard to how to get great numbers of people to come together in order to address issues. And so there is a strong movement against organized, structured meetings. And so my suggestion, what we do in our own meetings is we don't have open agendas, but we have invitational agendas. So the person facilitating the meeting will send out an email to everybody a week before the meeting, say, we're meeting, as you know, on whatever day. What items do you want placed on the agenda? So everybody creates the agenda together. And so it's a shared agenda, not the boss's agenda. And so that might be a halfway house between the non-meetings versus the structured meetings controlled by somebody in power, in order to create something which is meaningful and purposeful and makes sense to people, particularly those with a slightly more conventional mindset who get freaked out by a totally free open agenda, where particularly engineers. I mean, who would ever go to a non-agenda meeting if you're an engineer? I mean, what's the point when I've got so much work to do anyway? But anyway, so we're going to finish here, people. So thank you so much for sharing. And I know people like Kirby that they're in their own setting where they might not be able to share. So who knows? There are different circumstances why some people and never apologize. That's very British of sorry, Kerry, you're not dominating the conversation at all. You're participating. So no need to apologize. We're all here for whatever purpose, and that is part of that open agenda of hopefully this is helping you become more confident and stronger in seeing that there are ways of going about things that make sense for myself, for my group, for my family, for my children, for my community, and that if we emphasize these key principles, things will happen and go in the right direction. It's when we get distracted or maybe a bit afraid of going out and being quite so bold as to keeping to those principles, standing by them, and being fearless about those principles, that's when things start to go sideways. And if we can strengthen ourselves by saying, right, this works, and I can see that it works, getting those examples out there is very helpful. For next week, we're going to be looking at adaptive leadership. That's the work of Heifetz, Ron Heifetz at Harvard, and then Frederic Laloux on teal organizations, which are the organizations that are really breaking the mold of conventional organization. And that will open up, that will be already available to you. And we'll have that live session on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, we'll continue with the conversation about the how of the project, and hopefully some of these ideas will help you move the needle just that little bit further. But feel free to reach out if you want to have a conversation with me. And don't forget to get on the forum discussion board and share your ideas. And if you want to complete the journal and send it to me, that's fine. Finish the leadership action plan. Keep working on the how of the project. If there's anything to share, you want some feedback, you want to have a conversation, just let me know. Okay? Right, guys, thank you so much for being here. And
Thank you very much.
congratulations. Great. Congratulations on the work
Thank you
you're
very
doing or
much.
trying to do.
Thanks,
Bye.
John and
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a
Cheers,
good
bye.
one. Bye.
See you soon.